Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this introduction to Buddhism talk tonight on the core teachings of Buddhism. I'm going to start with the traditional homage to the Buddha, the teacher. Those of you who are unfamiliar with some of the traditions in Buddhism, I'll just explain that when we're giving a teaching on the Buddha's teachings, the Dharma, we traditionally begin by remembering that this teaching comes from a teacher. We haven't made it up ourselves. So we traditionally just reconnect with the beginnings of this teaching by paying homage to the Buddha. And I'm going to just chant those words in Pali. And what I'm saying is homage to the blessed, noble and perfectly enlightened one. And traditionally we say that 3 times. So those who wish to acknowledge the respect and debt of gratitude that we have to the Buddha for his teachings, just simply put their hands together in front of their heart in the gesture of Anjali, and this is how you also join with me silently as I chant this homage. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammāṃ Sanghaṃ Namasami. So the last part of that chant is to pay respects also to the teaching, the Dharma, and to the Sangha, the enlightened ones who've practiced and followed the Buddha's path to enlightenment. We only have an hour together for formal teaching, and there's quite a lot to get through. At the end of the hour, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. So if you can just keep the questions until the end, unless there's some burning issue that comes up as I go along, then you could just put your hand up and let me know that you've got a question. So the core teachings of Buddhism, all the Buddhas teach to refrain from evil, to cultivate what is good, and to purify the mind. That's the verse that's on the plinth of the standing Buddha statue outside, and this reminds us that the Buddha whom we pay respects to today in this era, Gautama Buddha, is one of in a lineage of Buddhas over many, many eons who have come into existence and taught the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha. And they all teach that basic teaching of refraining from evil, cultivating what is good, and purifying the mind. What we have to look at is how do we do that? Because those of you who've come from other religions and other traditions will see that there's a similarity in that basic teaching to what you will have heard in other religions. To be good, to do good, to try to give up what is unskillful, and then to purify the mind. So in this teaching from the Buddha, we have not only this outline, but we have a very detailed, gradual path of practice to follow in order to achieve the result of the pure mind. And as well as having that basic blueprint for practice, we also, at this point, have to ask, what is the end? What happens after we've purified the mind? Those of you who've come from other traditions will have a particular understanding of what is the end of the path to go to heaven, for example. So we have to understand what it is that we're working towards in Buddhism, what the core teachings point towards. So before I go into the different aspects of the teaching of the Buddha, I'd just like to go through some of the misconceptions that you might have, particularly coming from other religions or other traditions. And forgive me for those of you who are familiar with the Buddha's teaching if I'm repeating things which seem very obvious, but I know that there are some people here who haven't had much exposure to Buddhism. So the first of these things is to understand that the Buddha is not a god or not a messenger of the gods. And this is very important for us when we're understanding what we're doing in this religion. Buddhism is a path of practice. And because the Buddha was teaching something that he understood himself, that he discovered himself, not because he is a god or not because God told him, but because he was able to discover it. This is very fundamental to what we have to do ourselves if we want to know what the Buddha knew. We also have to discover it for ourselves. And the teaching isn't something that we just read about in books and that we just learn about from someone else. We have to do it and discover it. Not just believe it through faith, but experience it. Now, apart from the Buddha not being a god and not being the messenger of a god, he didn't talk about creation. He taught us what was necessary for us to free ourselves from suffering, to become liberated. And in the way that he explained the cosmos, in the explanation that he gave, human beings occupy just one realm in the cosmos, differently from how you might have been oriented to life coming from other traditions, where human beings are the pinnacle of creation and, if you like, occupy the focal point or the central point in creation. In Buddhism, there are 31 realms of existence, and human beings occupy the fifth from the bottom. And below us, there are the realms of the animals, which we can see, and then there are the realms of spirits. There are the realms of beings who are in a different kind of material existence to us, and it is mostly unhappy. And there are the hell realms, where the existence is certainly unhappy. And then above us, there are many realms where beings exist in a different form, different kind of materiality, and they enjoy only bliss. There are heavenly realms in Buddhism. And there are hell realms. But in Buddhism, none of these realms or none of these existences, these births, are permanent. There's no eternal damnation in hell or everlasting happiness in heaven. There are lifetimes of varying lengths, and beings are born into any of these realms of existence depending on the state of mind at the time of their death. Now, I'm not going to go into detail about this because next week Ajahn Brahm will be talking about karma and rebirth, and he'll go into details about this. But it's important for us to understand, when we're trying to understand the conceptual framework of Buddhism, that what we're talking about is, first of all, that this isn't the only life that we have. We're reborn. We've been in many lives before this. We'll be reborn somewhere else at the end of this life, if we still have the desire to be reborn. And that where we're going to be reborn will depend on the quality of our mind, and how we affect that is by the way we live in this life itself. And so this puts into perspective, or gives us some understanding of why it is so important to practice, to refrain from evil, to cultivate what is good, and to purify the mind. Because we are responsible for our own state of welfare during this life and in the future. And the Buddha said that the human realm is the best, the most favourable realm to be born into in terms of practice, because we have enough happiness to make life bearable and interesting, and we have enough unhappiness to make us want to sort things out, give us an incentive to try and find some answers to the questions that we have. Why is life like this? Why can't I get what I want? When I get what I want, what happens then? And so being born in this human realm is a very good karma, and especially to be born where we have such good conditions as we have here, where we're living in a peaceful place, where we have economic prosperity, where there's facilities like this. These are all the results of our good karma. So we affect the quality of our life by the way we use what we have as resources in our life. And so this is the framework that we are looking at when we are approaching the Buddhist teachings. When the Buddha decided to try to find answers to his questions about life, he left his family, left behind his royal position, and went in search of teachers who could show him answers to the questions he had. And the questions he had were similar to ones that you and I might have had or might have. Why is there suffering in the world? Why do people get sick? Why is there war? Why can't we all get on? Sort of basic questions about what's the purpose? What's the point? And after he couldn't find a teacher to give him the answers to his questions, he went on a voyage of discovery which was to look into his own mind. And at his enlightenment, he discovered the Four Noble Truths, which explained to him what life was about, what was its true nature, and how to deal with it. If we want to understand the core teachings of Buddhism, then we have to start with the Four Noble Truths. This is how the Buddha described his enlightenment. This is the first teaching that the Buddha gave as an enlightened being. So when we're looking at the heart of the Buddha's teaching, this is where we always have to look first. And as we look at these Four Noble Truths, we discover that within them they contain the whole of the teaching. The first of the Four Noble Truths is that life is inherently unsatisfactory. The second of the Four Noble Truths is that the cause of that unsatisfactoriness is our craving for it to be other than it is. The third of the Four Noble Truths is that there is a state of being that is beyond the ups and downs of life, enlightenment, nibbana, that can only be attained when we give up craving. And there is a path to follow, this is the fourth noble truth, which, if we cultivate it, leads us to nibbana, gives rise to nibbana, and that is the Noble Eightfold Path. The Four Noble Truths contain the Noble Eightfold Path. And the Noble Eightfold Path has 8 aspects to it. And the first aspect is right view or understanding. And right view contains understanding of the Four Noble Truths. So the Four Noble Truths contain the Noble Eightfold Path, and the Noble Eightfold Path contains the Four Noble Truths. I'm just giving you an outline before I go into more detail about what these things are actually meaning. Right view is the first aspect of the Noble Eightfold Path. Right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. This is the step-by-step gradual path to enlightenment, to realize the third noble truth. So let's go back and look at the Four Noble Truths. The truths which the Buddha, when he realized them and when he penetrated them, was his declaration of enlightenment. And the first noble truth is that life is inherently unsatisfactory. Life is by its nature imperfect. Now this is important in terms of what I was saying earlier, that the Buddha wasn't God, and that he was a human being trying to work with the conditions of life. Very often we work with the conditions of life and we think life is meant to be perfect, and there must be something wrong with me because I can't get it right. And especially if we come from a tradition that says, well, God created the world and He made it wonderful, and this is a wonderful creation and everything is perfect, and our life isn't perfect, then we find ourselves constantly blaming ourselves or dissatisfied or thinking that there's something missing, and if we can only find that missing piece, that we will be able to feel complete, fulfilled, happy. And the Buddha started off on a completely different tack. He said, life is imperfect by its very nature. And it's not a personal inadequacy that you can't make it perfect. That you can't get your own life completely in order, or that you can't make the world perfect. Save the world. This is a very, very important point to reflect on. Gives us a completely different orientation in Buddhism. Now, the Buddha wasn't saying that it's not possible to have happiness, to have enjoyment, to have moments of one's life when you feel, this is it, isn't it great? The Buddha wasn't denying that at all. But what he was saying is that one of the reasons why life is imperfect is because it's unstable and constantly changing. So even when you get things right, they don't stay that way permanently. And then there's the loss of what is dear, the change in those things which we want to keep. And that also is suffering. So the Buddha said there are three aspects to suffering. The Pali word is dukkha, sometimes translated as unsatisfactoriness, and very often as suffering. But it doesn't mean feeling pain all the time. There's dukkha, which is the ordinary facts of life, like old age, sickness and death, losing the things that we want to keep, not getting the things that we want, and having to be with things that we don't like. And then there's viparinama dukkha, which is the dukkha that arises because of change, because of instability, because everything is always in a flux and flow, and we can't hang on to it and keep it. And then the third of the aspects of dukkha is called dukkha sankhara, and that is the unsatisfactoriness that arises because everything in existence depends on something else for its existence. Nothing arises independently and of itself. And if we think about this body, for example, this is a good example of all three kinds of unsatisfactoriness. First of all, as you're sitting here, you've probably got an ache in your knee or an ache in your back or something that's not quite right. And fortunately, we can shift around and just get it a bit more comfortable for a few minutes. And then we have to do the same thing again. This body is a constant source of suffering. And it's only through being able to change position that we find some relief. And even if we can change position, we can't stop old age coming. We can't stop death coming. And the fact that we get old doesn't happen overnight. From the time we're born, there is constant change happening just as a matter of course in this body. And we like that change when we're growing up and we're getting bigger. Because when we get bigger, we can become independent. We can do what we like. We can go where we like. So we like that change. It's not that all change is bad, that all change is suffering. Some change we like. But when we start to change so that we get older and slower and weaker, and our memory's not so good and we're not as strong as we used to be, that change we don't like, but we can't stop it. And then this body, we might think, well, this is my body. But we depend on so many things to keep this body going. We depend on our food. Now, who cooked food? Who cooked tea tonight? You might have cooked your own tea, but did you grow the food that you cooked? Well, no, I didn't grow it. I went to the shop. Well, how did you get it from the shop to your house? Well, I bought it, of course. Well, what did you buy it with? Well, I bought it with money. Well, where did you get the money? Well, I had to go to work, didn't I? Well, where do you work? Well, I work in that place. Is that place yours? No, that place belongs to someone else. What happens if something happens to that place? If they close down? Well, I lose my job, then I don't have the money, then I can't go to the shop, I can't buy the food, I can't put it in the fridge, I can't put it in the oven, and I can't eat my tea. We need lots and lots of other people and lots of other things in our life so that this body can exist. And even if we get it all right and we're perfectly healthy, we're rich, we're happy, one day we're going to die and leave it all behind. So the happiness that we have is always going to be temporary. And the things that we use, the things that we have, the people that we have around us, it's always going to be borrowed, only for a short while. And so the Buddha said life is like this by its nature. And we suffer because we don't accept that. We don't like that. And this is again very important if we're looking at the framework which says human beings are not the centre of the universe. They are not the pinnacle of creation. Because part of our suffering is we think we are. We think we're the centre of our universe. And things that should happen according to our wishes. And when they don't, something's wrong. This is a very, very subtle wrong understanding. The Buddha said it's our wrong understanding that causes us grief. We know that everyone dies, and yet we get so surprised when someone that we care about dies. Not only surprised, we sorrow. We feel tremendous loss, and yet we know that everyone dies. Why don't we really know it? Because we don't understand and we don't accept. We wish, we have the desire, we have the craving for things to be other than they are. And this is the real source of our suffering. If we want to come out of suffering, then we have to give up this craving. And it's not a matter of giving it up through resignation. It's a matter of understanding the true nature of life. And the path of practice is about helping us, first of all, to see our wrong understanding. And then to cultivate the right understanding. So what frees us ultimately is wisdom, seeing things as they really are. And when we see things as they really are, we change our attitude, we give up our attachment to those things which we thought were going to bring us happiness. We attach to things which are impermanent and not under our control. And when we understand that, it's not a matter that someone has to take them away from us. We see it as it is. We understand that this thing was never mine in the first place. If you remember what it was like when you were young and you had a favourite toy, and you were very attached to that toy because that toy was special, it was mine. We had to have that. And we wouldn't like other people to come and play with it even, unless they asked us first. And if someone came and took it from us, we'd get very upset. But as we grow older, as we've gotten older, that same toy ceases to be so important. We've got other toys to play with. We don't think that that thing is as wonderful as it was in the beginning. We might open the cupboard one day and see our old toys in the cupboard, and instead of feeling like, oh, aren't they wonderful, no one should touch these, no one can play with these, we wonder, how can I get rid of this junk? Where can I give it away? Because we've lost our attachment to those things, because we understand that they're not the source of our true happiness. And this is what happens when we understand life. We understand the laws of nature, and we don't take it personally that we get old, that things change, that we lose those that we love. We just accept it as part of life. So, in order to reach that point of being willing to let go, we have to cultivate the mind. And we do this through practicing the Noble Eightfold Path. The Noble Eightfold Path has three aspects to it. The first aspect is morality, the cultivation of those good qualities of mind. And this is the right speech, right action, right livelihood. Right speech is speech which is honest, kind, gentle, and is about things that matter. Things that matter for our well-being and for our understanding of life. Right action is to refrain from harming other beings, to refrain from taking what is not given, and to refrain from sexual misconduct. Right livelihood is to engage in a livelihood which doesn't harm others, which doesn't exploit others. The Buddha listed a number of livelihoods which shouldn't be engaged in. Trading in poisons, trading in weapons, trading in alcohol and drugs, trading in animal flesh, and trading in human beings. These are 5 livelihoods which shouldn't be followed. And whatever other livelihood we take up, it should always be one which is harmless and which is not exploiting others or exploiting the environment, making our greed grow. So right speech, right action, right livelihood, this is the foundation for a good life, and also for the further cultivation of the path, for the development of the mind. If we don't live to a minimum standard of morality that these 3 aspects of the Eightfold Path point to, then the Buddha said that the mind will never be able to become quiet, peaceful, and calm enough to penetrate into the truth of life. And even as we live in our ordinary everyday life, we won't be happy. There'll be inner turmoil, inner dis-ease, through living in a way which is harmful and brings us into conflict with the people around us. The next aspect or section of the Noble Eightfold Path is right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And this part of the Noble Eightfold Path deals directly with the cultivation of the mind. So the morality section provides a foundation, and then this section of the path is to address the unruly mind directly. It's to do with meditation. And anyone who's practiced meditation will know that it is hard going. It's a skill which can be mastered, but it takes effort, it takes practice, and it takes perseverance to be able to pacify the mind and develop the strength of mind that allows us to maintain equanimity in the face of the ups and downs of life, and also to develop the clarity of mind which allows us to see beyond the surface appearance of things, to develop wisdom. Right effort is about being able to control the thoughts that come into our mind. Right effort has two aspects, or actually four aspects to it. The first one is not to allow an unwholesome thought that has not arisen in the mind to come into the mind. The second aspect is not to allow an unwholesome thought that has come into the mind to stay in the mind. The next aspect is to make a wholesome thought that has arisen in the mind stay in the mind. And the last aspect is to generate wholesome thoughts when there aren't any wholesome thoughts there. Now, in order to do this, we have to know what is wholesome and what is unwholesome. So what is wholesome in Buddhism is thought, speech and action that doesn't harm ourselves or others now and in the future. And unwholesome thought, speech and action is what harms ourselves or others now or in the future. In order to be able to know what's going on in the mind and to make an assessment of what's there, we have to practice right mindfulness. And right mindfulness is about developing the quality of mind which is able to witness what is going on in the mind as a detached observer, without getting pulled into the thoughts that are arising. Now, the simile that's given to understand this quality of mindfulness is the simile of standing on the footpath and watching a parade go by. When you're the bystander, you're standing there, you're taking an interest in everything that's going by. You might be getting excited by it, you might be enjoying it, but you just stand on the pavement and watch as it passes. If you lose that stance of being the observer, when the parade comes by, you get so enthusiastic and delighted with it that you jump on one of the floats and ride down the street with the parade. You're right in the middle of it. When we're cultivating the quality of right mindfulness to observe the thoughts that are arising in the mind, we cultivate the ability to observe the thought, a thought about the past, for example, or a thought to do with desire or with any state, without jumping in and becoming the actor in the thought. So, for example, we might have a memory of the past, maybe a very pleasant experience that we had last week. And if we're practicing mindfulness, we will notice, here's a thought from the past. This is a thought about something pleasant. And we might even notice that when we think about something pleasant from the past, that it produces a pleasant feeling in the present moment. If we maintain the stance of the witness. But if we become the actor in the thought, when we have that memory coming up of what we did last week and it was pleasant, oh, I remember I was wearing such and such and the sun was shining, and then we go back and we relive the whole episode. I said this and they did that and that. And we go on and on and on. And before we know it, we're really reliving a part of our life that is gone. And we don't even know where we are. We might be in the middle of doing something and we're not paying attention to that. We might be walking and we're not aware of walking. We're not aware of what's actually happening in the present moment. We've lost it. And when we sit down to meditate, this is what happens again and again and again. We're trying to observe a meditation object like the breath, and the mind constantly moves away to the past or the future, and we become the actor in our thoughts. And we lose the meditation object, and we relive something that's already passed. Or we project into the future something that hasn't come, and we get lost in the future. So right mindfulness is about developing this detached observer aspect of the mind so that we can start to choose which kinds of thoughts we're going to allow in. Because when we lose the balance of our mind and become the actor, we lose the quality of discernment, which knows this isn't for my good. This will take me into suffering. This will take me into pain. This is an unhappy thought. Why do I want to think an unhappy thought and get lost in it and get unhappy again? This is a thought about the future. Who knows what's going to happen in the future? Why am I spending my time lost in something that I don't know is even going to happen? So we have to have this mindfulness to be able to know what's going on. And then we have to have right effort to put away the thoughts which are unskillful and make the skillful thoughts grow. But in order to have the strength of mind to do that, we have to develop the next aspect of the path, which is right concentration. And right concentration, I'm sure Ajahn Brahm talked about last week when he was talking about meditation and the mind. But in terms of the overall path of practice, right concentration is about being able to develop the strength of mind which allows us to keep focusing on the thing that we want to pay attention to. So if we're practicing meditation on the breath, to be able to stay moment by moment by moment paying attention to that object, to the breath. That helps us to build up muscles in the mind so that when we are in our everyday life and an unhappy thought comes into the mind, and we know that it's unhappy and we know that it's not good for us, we have the strength to put that thought down and pick up a happy thought. If we practice concentration, then we develop the strength of mind to do that. And we also develop the clarity of mind to see clearly. Because when we're able to stay paying attention continuously to one object, the mind naturally settles down, becomes less disturbed, And from within the mind itself, there arises a feeling of peace. And the more that we're able to develop this right concentration, the deeper that feeling of inner peace will be. And that inner peace doesn't have to be put in, it has to be uncovered. It's there already. And in the meditation, what we're doing is we are allowing it to come to the surface of the mind. Normally the mind is jammed packed with thoughts and all sorts of unnecessary things. So there's no space for that peace to come through. With the meditation practice, we clear out the debris in the mind and the peace arises. And then with that clear, strong mind, we're able to cultivate wisdom. And this is the next aspect of the Noble Eightfold Path. We go back to the beginning, right view, right intention. The wisdom aspect of the path reveals itself the more we're able to make the mind calm, clear and strong. Otherwise, we live always in a very superficial understanding of life. We're always just seeing the surface appearance of things without being able to penetrate to a deeper level of reality. So first of all, right intention. Right intention has three aspects. The intention not to harm, the intention not to be cruel, and the intention not to be greedy. And this is, if we reflect on it, this is the direction that we need to be heading in if we want to cultivate this path. And not only to cultivate not being harmful, not being cruel, not being greedy, but to cultivate their positive aspects, to be loving and kind, to be compassionate, and to practice renunciation, giving up. If we're going to make progress on the path, then we need to reflect on our intentions before we speak, before we act, and even as we're thinking. Am I acting according to the intention of harmlessness? Am I acting according to the intention of compassion? Am I acting according to the intention of renunciation? Now, renunciation doesn't just mean giving up our material things, it means giving up our views and opinions. As we go along on this path and we see that what we took to be truth, what we took to be the way things are is actually wrong, we have to be willing to give up those views and opinions. So there are always things to discover and things to give up. So for example, we might have the view and opinion that as long as I eat the right food and do the right exercise, go to the gym so many days a week, have my supplements, only eat what's wholesome food, I'll be able to keep myself fit and healthy. And I'll be able to keep looking good long after everyone else starts to show the signs of wear and tear. And we might be able to succeed for a while and we start to think, see, I knew I was right. And then we notice that those telltale signs of aging are catching up with even our body. The hair starts to turn grey and the hair thins and the wrinkles come and the aches don't go away when we've had a rest and all that sort of thing. And we might struggle against that because we don't want to accept the truth that it doesn't matter how good our food is, it doesn't matter how much exercise we do, that this body is bound to break down. And instead of suffering about that, we renounce, we give up the view that we had. It's it's interesting to think, well, of course you'd give that up when you feel those aches and pains. But how many times do we see people refusing to acknowledge the aging process, keeping up with dress that's no longer appropriate, dyeing the hair, having facelifts, all of those things. People go to all sorts of extremes to try to push back the aging process. So once we see that what we took to be truth is actually wrong, inaccurate, can we give up that view and opinion? So that's right intention, which is part of the wisdom aspect. We have the intention to renounce, but when we see things clearly, then it's easy to renounce, to give up. Just like it was easy to put our toys away when we saw that they were no longer so important in our life. The other aspect of right view, of the wisdom aspect, is right view. And this is where we see the kernel of the Buddha's teaching once more appearing. Right view or right understanding is to understand the Four Noble Truths. And the Buddha said the first aspect of this wisdom is to understand that life is unsatisfactory. The second aspect is to know that the cause of that unsatisfactoriness is self-centered desire, and to abandon that. The third aspect, the wisdom aspect, is to know that there is a state of peace beyond conditioned existence, nibbana, and to realize that. And the fourth of the Noble Truths is that there is a path, a way of coming to that understanding, the Noble Eightfold Path, and that should be developed. As well as the Four Noble Truths, there are three other aspects of right view or right understanding which need to be looked at and understood and then investigated in our own experience. The first of these is the teaching on cause and effect, the teaching on karma. And again, Ajahn Brahm will talk about that next week in detail, but it basically means that it matters what we do. It matters what we think, it matters what we say, it matters what we do in our behaviour, because these things produce effects. How we think affects the way we feel. How we feel affects what we say. What we say affects how we feel, and it affects other people around us. It affects us in the present, and it sets up a chain of cause and effect that has resultants in this life and in future lives. I'll leave this for Ajahn Brahm to talk about next week because there just isn't time to go into it in detail. But the teaching on karma is one of the things that we need to understand in right understanding. The second thing that we need to understand is called dependent origination or codependent arising. And this is one of the teachings which is peculiar to the Buddhas. And this is the teaching which I alluded to earlier, that nothing in this world arises on itself, independent of causes and conditions, which bring it into being, allow it to exist, and when those causes and conditions change, that thing also changes until it passes away. So if you think about, again, this body according to the Buddha's teachings, arises not just because of mother and father coming together, providing the sperm and the ovum, the materiality, but also because of mentality, because of the consciousness which comes from a previous life into the being to be born. And this consciousness is propelled from its previous birth to find a place, a suitable resting place, a suitable roosting place, according to the quality of energy that it is, according to the quality of energy of that being at the time of death in the last birth. So at the time of death, the quality of mind that we have will depend on how we've lived our life, and if we have lived a good life, then that quality of energy will be appropriate for a human birth. If as a human being we've lived like an animal, not caring about other people, not honouring other people's property or other people's relationships, if we've been only interested in looking out for ourselves, getting enough to eat, finding a place of shelter, procreating, these are the preoccupations of animals, then at the time of death, with a mind that is that kind of energy, that mind will seek a place to reborn that's appropriate for an animal. Independent origination, everything arises depending on other causes and conditions. So for rebirth to happen, it's causes and conditions that were happening in the previous life. They come together to produce the being in this life. Now, once we're in this life itself, there are many things that affect us. Not only the food that we eat, but the things that we see, the things that we hear, the things that we taste, the things that we touch, the things that we smell, all produce reactions within us. And those reactions within us are the cause of a new reaction. We act in the world because of what we've seen, because of what we've heard, because of what we've smelt, tasted and touched. So for example, we're feeling in a pretty not so good mood, and we walk into the kitchen and someone's cooking our favourite food, and before we even see it, we've smelt it. And it already creates a reaction within us. That's nice. And it creates a reaction physically. The mouth starts to water. And then we start to think, isn't this great? And before we've even looked at it, then we go over and look at it. Isn't this great? My favourite food. We start to feel our stomach growling. And we think the person that's there is great. They've prepared just the food I like. And then they tell us, this isn't for us to eat. I'm taking this out to my friend's place. We're going out to have a night together. And then all of those things that we've been anticipating just change instantaneously. The stomach is growling. It's not just anticipating something nice. The feeling in the mouth becomes a bitter taste because I'm not going to get the food that I want. And instantaneously we might say, that's what I thought, not for me. Another time when you're just leaving me with nothing to eat, going out with your friends, and that goes on and on. So what we experience produces reactions within us, and from those reactions we act in the world, and we might end up having an argument that goes on for days because of what we've come in contact with. So this teaching on codependent arising teaches us that what we have in this life started before this life. The beginnings come from the previous birth, but in this life itself there is this continuing multiple cause and condition producing our experience in the present moment. And if we don't learn to control our reactions, and if we don't learn to understand life at its deepest level, we'll keep on making the same mistakes again and again and again. We'll keep on getting upset because we can't get what we want. We'll keep on blaming someone else for our unhappiness because they don't provide us with what we want. We won't have discovered the peace within our own heart that leads us to be able to see things even more deeply than we did before. So this is the next aspect of right view. And the last one, which I'll just quickly touch on because we're coming to the end of the time, is the understanding of the three characteristics of existence. The three characteristics of existence, these, the Buddha said, are laws, facts of life which apply to everything in existence, not just in the human realm, but in all of those 31 realms of existence, the higher realms, the lower realms included. First of all, that everything is impermanent and changing, nothing is stable. Because everything changes and it's not in our control, it's ultimately unfulfilling and unsatisfactory, it's dukkha, suffering, and that there is no core to anything in existence which doesn't change. There's nothing in this body which is essentially me and stays the same over time. So even when rebirth takes place, it is not that I get reborn. It's that mind and body, which are constantly changing and being produced by what we experience in life, changes and changes, and at the death this body wears out, falls apart, changes back into the elements, its component parts, and the mind, that energy, seeks rebirth somewhere else, but not as an ongoing entity, but from one moment to the next, changing into something else. Now, as I said at the beginning of this talk, the Buddha discovered these truths and we have to discover them for ourselves as well. This is a path of practice. And all that I've said can only be known as being really true if we experience it ourselves within our own mind and body. So the world in Buddhism exists within this mind and body. What we take to be a human being, what we take to be me, is, the Buddha said, an interaction of processes, some of them mental, some of them physical. And everything there is to know about the world, we can know by understanding this mind and body, really understanding it. So, to come back to the opening of this talk, when I said that the Buddha didn't talk about creation and the beginning of the world, you can understand why. Because the world in Buddhism arises in this mind and body. And the goal of enlightenment is to move beyond this world, not into some heavenly realm where we live happily forever after, but to come to the end of this whole process of arising and passing away. So the enlightened being comes to the end of the world because there is no more arising of that being. So the world ceases. In other religions, the world goes on and on and on. But in Buddhism, the world ceases when we become enlightened. So what we're aiming to realize through giving up evil, cultivating what is good and purifying the mind isn't to be reborn eternally in bliss, but to move beyond even bliss to the end of everything, to the non-arising of any aspect of being. These are the core teachings of Buddhism. Many of you will be perhaps aware of Buddhism, thinking of Buddhism as having the core teachings of loving kindness, compassion, equanimity and joy in the happiness of others. These are the positive outcomes of a purified mind. Just as we discover that we have happiness and peace within our mind already, once we purify the mind, we will discover that we have love, compassion, joy in others' happiness and equanimity also already in our own heart once we purify the mind of our self-centeredness. And so these things go along with the other aspects of the practice. But the core teachings, the wisdom aspect, are what we need in order to be able to really purify the mind at its deepest level and to really come to the end of suffering. So I'll end there and ask if any of you have any questions about tonight's teaching, or anything that you didn't hear in the teaching that you thought you were going to hear in the core teachings of Buddhism. I'd be happy if you ask me about that. Yes.
I've heard that in some schools of Buddhism, they believe that if you are reborn in a female form, that you can't achieve enlightenment. Where does that all come from, and what did the Buddha actually teach?
The Buddha said very clearly and directly that women have the same spiritual capacities as men and the same ability to attain enlightenment. And there were many women in the time of the Buddha who became fully enlightened, and many since that time. The traditional teaching is that in order to become the Samma Sambuddha, that is the one who discovers the path that has been lost, that being in their final birth before that, as the Bodhisattva, while they're coming to the point of full Buddhahood, that being has to be born as a man, because that path, that last life is fraught with so many difficulties. Now that's the tradition, that in order to attain the first enlightenment, if you like, of the teacher, that being has to be born as a man. But certainly any woman is who practices the path is able to attain enlightenment. But we have to understand that all of us have been males and females. We've had countless births throughout beginningless time. And that when we practice deeply and we move beyond identification with this body or our social role, that we discover that the mind is gender-free. It's neither male nor female. The laws of nature pertain to this mind regardless of whether we're male or female. So it's a wrong understanding if you have heard that you can't become enlightened as a woman. And the Buddha made it very clear, he said it very directly, that females have the same opportunity, same capacity as men to become enlightened. And there are instances in the Therigatha, the stories of the enlightened nuns when they were declaring their enlightenment, stories about how the Buddha encouraged them when they were doubting their capacity. He encouraged them not to go back to what seemed the easy way, back to household life, but to see it through, because they had the potential to become fully enlightened. And there are many examples of that from the Buddha's time. So you don't have to think that this is just a modern phenomenon. It was approximately 3 centuries after the time of the Buddha. 3 months after the Buddha passed away, there was a gathering of the fully enlightened disciples of the Buddha. I must say only the males, not the females. But it was only 3 months after the passing away of the Buddha when they collected in one place 500 fully enlightened monks to recite the teaching and to standardize the teaching, so that there was a general consensus amongst the fully enlightened bhikkhus about what was the Buddha's teaching. So they gathered people together from all over India of that time, the Buddhist land of that time, to reach an agreement on what was what the Buddha actually taught. So from that time, when 3 months after the Buddha's passing away, when many of the very well-known disciples of the Buddha who had frequent contact with him, heard his teachings, Venerable Ananda, who heard all the teachings of the Buddha as the Buddha's attendant, when he was invited to become the Buddha's attendant, he made a couple of requests, and one of them was that if ever he was absent performing other duties and the Buddha gave a teaching, that when he returned from performing those duties, the Buddha would repeat to him the teaching that he'd given, that he'd missed. So Venerable Ananda was in the position of having heard all the teachings that the Buddha gave, and he was still alive and he was still in attendance and recited the teachings that the Buddha gave. There was another monk, Venerable Upali, who was the expert in the Vinaya, the teachings on the monastic rules, and he recited all of those. So there was an agreement right at that time, 3 months after the passing away of the Buddha, that this is what the Buddha taught. And then there were councils, 3 councils after that. The last one 100 years after the passing of the Buddha, and then the most recent one in 1956 in Burma, where all of the teachings were recited and agreement reached that these were the actual teachings given by the Buddha. In the time of the Buddha, it was things were memorized, and even in the time of the Buddha, it had already become the practice that some monks and nuns became most conversant with the teachings in the actual Dharma teachings and recited those, and others who had a tendency towards being interested in the Vinaya and the monastic rules became familiar with those and recited those. So even while the Buddha was still alive, there was a standardization of the teaching that he gave. The person becomes fully enlightened by cultivating the Noble Eightfold Path, and the Buddha said this path leads towards enlightenment. It's just a matter of being persevering in one's practice. We may not become enlightened in this birth itself. We have to keep cultivating it and producing the conditions for being able to continue to cultivate it in future lives. That's why it's so important how we live our life, because we are creating our future birth. And we're not only creating our future birth, we're creating the opportunities to come in contact with the teaching again, have the teachers around, and being able to practice in a situation that's conducive to developing what we need for enlightenment. There is a teaching which, if I'd had time, I would have gone through, but I haven't had time, called the 37 Requisites for Enlightenment. And these deal specifically with those mental qualities that one has to develop. So things like mindfulness, concentration, wisdom, but energy, equanimity, joy, tranquility, investigation of the Dharma. These are all qualities of mind which the Buddha mentions specifically as necessary for enlightenment. But in order to become enlightened, as I said, we need the three aspects of the path. We need the foundation of morality, we need the direct development of the mind, and then we need the wisdom factor, the understanding factor. When someone becomes enlightened, there are two aspects to this. One is nibbana with remainder, and one is nibbana without remainder. Nibbana with remainder is the enlightened being while they're still living out their lifespan. So all beings have a lifespan determined by their karma, and even an enlightened being still has a lifespan to live out till their karma is exhausted. So the Buddha, for example, became enlightened when he was 35, and then he lived until he was 80, and he taught for 45 years. And that was his lifespan. So after he became enlightened and he was completely at ease with life and completely at peace with things, he continued to live, and that is nibbana with remainder. When the enlightened being passes away, we don't say they die, we say they attain parinibbana, and that is nibbana without remainder. At that time, when the enlightened being passes away, there's no more arising of the mind and the body, there's no more rebirth. So that is the ending of all formations. So that's the ending. For us, it's very difficult to conceive that non-existence might be a good thing, because we all crave so much to survive. And so if you're new to Buddhism, this might seem like you're trying to do something which doesn't sound like a very good result at all. So this is why the wisdom aspect is so important, to understand what it is when we talk about a being, when we talk about me. And I don't have time to go into that in detail now, but what we're not talking about annihilating a person. We're talking about the fact that we wrongly understood what was here in the first place. That what we took to be a person, what we took to be a me, is just a flux and flow of mental and physical phenomenon. And when the conditions for keeping that going are no longer there, that flux and flow ceases. It's not that we kill off someone who was here. But this is a very deep aspect of the teaching, and it's not something that you have to believe, but it's not something that you can really grasp until you cultivate the conditions for moving in that direction. And those conditions are the morality, the virtue aspect, the peaceful, clear mind, the meditation aspect, and the wisdom aspect, the knowing aspect. Yes?
Can you explain nirvana? Because it's a word that's heard often.
Right. Can I explain nibbana? In this tradition we use the Pali language and we say nibbana, and the Sanskrit word is nirvana. Both of those words mean the going out, the quenching of a flame. It was a word that was used in the standard language of the day of the Buddha, it meant the going out of a flame. And very often the Buddha took words which were in common use to try to clarify or make clear some of the deeper aspects of the teaching. So Nibbana means the going out, and it means the going out of greed, hatred and delusion. This is what the Buddha said keeps us going round and round, the wheel of birth and death. It's the going out of craving. And when craving, which propels us, and ignorance, which supports that because we don't understand things as they really are, when those things cease, then what we take to be me, this being, goes out, ceases. So Nibbana is not a heavenly realm, and it's not a state of annihilation, because what we took to be a being in the first place wasn't actually what we took it to be anyway. We take ourselves to be permanent, and then we get a shock when we're faced with death. We take me to have something in me that is really definitively me, an essential me. And we might look to find that. Where is it? In this body? Well, this body's constantly changing. Which bit of it has stayed the same since we were... Was me the little one when I was first born? All of that's gone now. Every cell in the body's changed many times. Looks different, feels different. So maybe it's me now. But this body's constantly changing. It looked different, it felt different last year than how it feels right now. So this body isn't me, but what about the mind, my experiences, how I think, how I feel emotionally? That's me. And then when we examine those things, and not just superficially, but with the mind that's developed in meditation, we see that all of those things are constantly changing. Our memories of who we were when we were young, they're all prejudiced. They're all filtered through how we were feeling at that time, what we knew of the world at that time, what we were taught by other people about the world, what our culture said, what our parents said, what we learned at school. And then as we learn more things, we change our ideas, we wonder, how could I have ever thought that? How could I have ever reacted that way? God, I'd die if anyone knew that I was like that when I was 19. Because we've just changed. Who we think we are has just changed. And the teaching is pointing to the fact that that change is happening moment by moment by moment. And so nothing in this mind and body is essentially me. It's all conditioned. It's all arising, connected to other things, dependent on other things. None of it exists essentially as me. If this doesn't happen, then that doesn't arise. When that changes, this changes. If this isn't here, then that doesn't happen. And so what we took to be something solid, permanent, fixed, and me, was never here in the first place. And so when Nibbana happens, it's not the killing off of that, it's the no longer arising of all those various things, mental and physical. We do have a personality which is made up of our habit patterns and of our conditioning. So what we've been taught, how to speak, when not to speak, how to walk, what not to do, those things that we've learned. We might go along with them, or we might rebel against them. That might create our personality. All the things we do not to do what we've been told or taught. That might be our personality. And we all have that, but it's all conditioning and it's all changeable. None of it's permanent. None of it exists just on its own. So personality is like the cloak we wear, but we can take it off, we can change it too. Now, the Buddha taught what we need to get out of suffering. And there were people in the time of the Buddha, even monks, who kept coming up and saying, well, look, I've been around now for a while and you still haven't told me where it all began or how it all began. And when are you going to teach us about the beginning of things? And the Buddha would say, well, you don't need that in order to free yourself. I've taught you what you need. And in fact, one monk came up and said, right, well, I'm going to disrobe now if you don't tell me. And this is the question I, really want to know the answer to. Where did it all begin? And the Buddha said to him, now tell me, when you ordained, did I say to you, this is what I'm going to teach you? Did I ever say this was the reason for becoming a monk? And he said, well, no, it wasn't. The Buddha said, I've always told you that what I'm teaching you is suffering and the end of suffering. And so he didn't ever elaborate on that, how it all began. And the reason was not only that we don't need to know that in order to free ourselves from suffering, but he said that with the mind that we have, with our misunderstanding of things, that we cannot conceptualize it, we cannot conceive of it as it really is. So, for example, if we have the stance of I exist as a separate entity, and I am this body and I am this mind and I'm the centre of the universe, then we're not going to be able to accept what he says is the beginning of things, is the reason why we're here, because it won't suit our view. We'll say, well, what does he know anyway? Because we won't be able to take it in. And the thing that the Buddha encourages is to practice, to become enlightened, and then you will know. It's not that it's not possible to know these things, and only he knows it and he's not going to tell you, but you can know it for yourself when you get enlightened. And certainly as you go along the path, you see how wrong your views were. We see how wrongly we've understood things. And little by little it becomes clearer. And we can understand what the Buddha was saying when he said that your mind is so wrongly apprehending things that are right in front of you now. How can you grasp the beginning? So the simile that's given is, for the child who's starting at kindergarten, there's no point in teaching them theoretical physics, because it's just not going to, it's not something that they can assimilate. It's not something that they've got any basis for understanding. When they get to university and they get to their post-graduate study, then they will be able to understand those things. So it's not that it's a hidden teaching that you're not going to get. It's there, but you have to be ready to receive it, or ready to open up to it. But the Buddha talked about the beginningless beginning. If we try to go back and go back and go back, it just, it's pointless. He said, from the point of view of saying, I want to know where it began, and then I'll start practicing. Another simile that he gave was the story of the poison arrow, and this is quite well known in Buddhist stories. He said it's like someone who's shot with a poison arrow, and when someone comes along and wants to take out the poison arrow, the person says, "Hey, no, before you take it out, I want to know who shot it, and I want to know what kind of poison it is, and I want to know where the arrow came from, what kind of tree it's made from, and what sort of feathers are in it." And by the time he finds out all those things, the poison has killed him. And the Buddha said, this is like the person who says, "No, I want to know where it all began first, and only when I know all that, I'll start to practice." And the Buddha said, "I'm teaching you how to get out. And once you do that, you'll be able to understand. So work from here, and then you'll be able to solve the beginning bit." Yes?
What sort of proof or evidence is there in the principles you just enunciated truly explain what life is all about?
Right. So what is the proof? The reason why we're doing this is to get out of suffering, to become more happy and peaceful. And that's the yardstick for measuring whether this works and whether it's true, is that as you cultivate the path, life gets easier, the mind becomes more peaceful, the mind becomes much clearer, and life isn't such a burden any longer. And so it becomes evident that there's some truth in what you've been taught, or the guidance that you've been given. And little by little, that peace, that happiness, that ease grows and grows and grows. And for the fully enlightened being, you can see for yourself that they're not affected by the ordinary conditions of life. So the things that make people miserable, like getting sick, not getting food that they want, not being with the people that they would choose to be with, all of those things don't matter. That person has an inner peace which isn't affected by changing conditions. And that's the proof. So anyone who takes up this path, they can measure whether they've got it by the results they're getting in their life. The results can be experienced here and now. They don't have to be, the results aren't to be experienced next life or when we finally get born in heaven. The results can be experienced right here and now. So that's the proof. And otherwise, it's not about convincing anyone that this is the way. We're not about saying this is the way and everything else is wrong. It's not about just believing. The whole point is to practice it. It is a path of practice. And that's why we're so fortunate, because it's very clearly laid out, step by step by step. We don't have to say, well, what is the right way to live? The Buddha said, these are 5 precepts, these are 5 guidelines. Don't harm other beings. Don't take what is not given. Don't commit sexual misconduct. Don't commit adultery. Don't lie. And don't use drugs and alcohol because they confuse the mind and make it easy to break all the other precepts. So we don't have to wonder, what should I do? How far should I go? What's the limit for living a good life? Here we are, 5 precepts already there. And then we commit ourselves to them and see what difference it makes in our life. And everything's laid out like that. And what makes sense, what works for us, we take that and use it. And what we can't understand and what doesn't seem to make sense or doesn't appeal to us, we put that aside. But we shouldn't discount it and say it can't be right or it doesn't matter, because the Buddha's teaching is a whole package. So we may not understand it right now, it may not make sense to me right at this moment, but I'll just put it aside for now and use what seems useful. One of the other qualities of the Dharma is it invites you to come and see. It says, come and try it out. Don't believe it just because you've heard it. Do it and see for yourself. It doesn't mean that we're always going to get what we want. It's not a magic formula for worldly happiness and success, because the first noble truth is that life is inherently imperfect, and the Buddha wasn't about trying to make the world perfect. That's a fundamental difference between Buddhism and other religions. We do what we can to make the world as good a place as possible, but we're not trying to save the world, and we're not expecting that worldly things are ever going to give us real peace and happiness, deep peace and happiness. So when we take up the precepts, for example, and we can no longer lie because we've committed ourselves to that standard of behaviour, then we may not be able to do some of the things we used to do. We might in the past have been very often exaggerating, or we might be in a profession or a job that means that we have to sort of twist the truth a bit, not tell the whole story. And then we may not be able to do that anymore because that would go against the principles that I've decided to live by. So it may not be comfortable for us to take up those precepts. So this isn't about making our life comfortable and easy, but it's about working towards something even much better, which is real inner peace. It's a challenge. Yes?
You said earlier that that state of mind that they in the second half of their life has cultivated with karma. If you take everything into consideration.
The question is about if someone in the first half of their life broke some of the precepts and then in the second half cultivated the path, what would happen at the time of death? Would that negate? First of all, the precepts are not like commandments, thou shalt not, and if you break them then something terrible is going to happen. These are actually ways of training our speech and behaviour, and we're not going to get it perfect when we first start off, because our habit patterns will be sometimes taking us in other directions. So if we've always been good at telling a good story that, exaggerates a bit, and we've been doing that for the whole of our life, then it's going to take a while to change that habit pattern. And so we might catch ourselves after we've exaggerated, and then we think, did it again, next time I won't. So it takes a while to change the habit patterns of the mind. And sometimes we'll find ourselves in situations where we still don't have the strength to keep up the standard that we've committed ourselves to. So we might find, for example, that it's very difficult to say no to alcohol or drugs because our friends all use them and we have in the past, and so we get into a situation where we normally would be doing what those people are doing, and then it's easier to just do it than to get into an argument or whatever. So it takes time to change our behaviours. And in terms of the effects that this has on our life, the Buddha certainly encouraged us to ask ourselves continually, does this thing that I'm about to say or do lead to my happiness or to my suffering? And as we become more wise and more in control of our mind, we can choose to take up the things which bring our happiness and not do the things which bring suffering. And when we see that we can do that, we're prepared to keep on making the effort. That's how we change. So, in terms of your question, what we're doing is we're trying to reduce the unwholesomeness in our life and increase the wholesomeness. And what happens is that the unwholesome things that we've done, just like the good things, aren't erased by the good that we do now. It's not that they disappear, but their potency to produce mind states or behaviour in the future are reduced by the fact that we're now increasing the strength of goodness in our life. So even as we're alive, if we practice really using right speech, it becomes harder and harder to tell a lie until we just cannot tell a lie, because we've got so much of the wholesome speech as our behind us. The strength of that, accumulated strength of that, is so strong that we just can't tell a lie. But the lies that we've told in the past will still have an energy to them, a potential energy to them to produce an unhappy result for us. But they will be diluted because of the strength of the goodness. Now, at the time of our death, the strength of the good that we've done is likely to make those other things inoperative or inactive at that time. And that's why it's important that we keep on cultivating what is good. At the time of our death, anything that we've done that's been very powerfully good or powerfully bad is likely to fruit. If there's nothing that's powerfully good or powerfully bad, then the thing that's happening while we're dying is the thing that's likely to be the last thought, the last moment of consciousness. And that's why it's important, the time of death, to have a peaceful place, if possible, to be reminded of one's good actions, one's goodness in one's life. In Buddhism, we don't remind people of the bad things they've done at the time of their death. We remind them of the good things they've done. We try to set up an environment where they can see something that brings joy and happiness into their mind, not misery and guilt. So that's one of the things. If there's nothing happening at that time, then any other things which we do habitually are likely to come into our mind. So if we've been used to keeping the precepts, cultivating what is good, then any of the things that we've done that are good are likely to come into the mind, because that's a habit pattern we've established. And then other than that, anything that's happening at the time, it can be random, will come into the mind. So that's again why it's important for us to take control of our mind and start to direct it while we've got the opportunity. One of the similes that's given is that the mind is like, our actions are like a spoonful of salt. A spoonful of salt that's put into a tumbler of water will make all the water salty in that tumbler. But if we put a spoonful of salt into the river Ganges, you won't be able to notice any change in the river Ganges. So any unwholesomeness that we've committed, if we continue to commit unwholesomeness and we don't do anything to change our way of being and produce good states, then the smallest thing is going to add to that salt in the container, and our mind's going to be full of that unwholesomeness at the time of death. But if we've done unwholesomeness but we've continued to cultivate what is good, then it's like a teaspoon of salt in the river Ganges. It's not lost, it's still there, but it doesn't have much power. That's why it's so important that we cultivate the mind. And we have just the potential, the power in Buddhism is the power to take control of our mind and to determine our life and our rebirth. The quality of our life in this very life itself, we have got the possibility of determining. So it's, as you might appreciate, very difficult to cover the whole of the Buddha's teaching in an hour, and to put it in a way that is accessible for people who don't have any background in the teaching. So it goes without saying that there will be unanswered questions, things that aren't clear, and so you're just encouraged to not think that that's just you, or that it's easy. It's not so easy. So next week, Ajahn Brahm will be talking about karma and rebirth, and that will perhaps answer some of those trickier questions you have about cause and effect. Why is it like this? And about rebirth in the next life. So, if that's... I think we'll end there. So thank you all for coming, and I hope it was useful for you.